I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past and present. Hello everyone, my name is Catherine Barrett and I am the CEO of Celebrate Ageing, a charity combating ageism and building respect for older people. I'm very excited today to be here launching the Gender Lens for Elder Abuse Prevention and Responses with you. And today you'll meet Anna Gillbard, who'll share with you what a gender lens can teach us. I'll provide you with an overview of the gender lens and what's in it. We'll hear from Debra Nicholl, the CEO of Elder Rights Australia, on the implications of the gender lens for elder abuse services. And then we'll hear from Robert Fitzgerald, Age Discrimination Commissioner. To start with, what I would like to do is to acknowledge the importance of gender, and the gender plays a really pivotal role in our lives across the lifespan. And I want to read to you some of those influences to really give you the sense of how grand, how powerful this list is. Gender has an influence in our lives from an early age. It influences the schools we attend, the sports we play. It influences leadership recognition, employment opportunities, workplace safety, rates of pay, social experiences, caring responsibilities, exposure to violence and abuse, rates of sexual assault, levels of health and wellbeing, health-seeking behaviours, and access to health and support services. But somehow when we get to old age, we stop talking about gender. We stop recognising the influence that gender plays in the lives of older people. And that's why we're here today. This work, this gender lens work, is founded on the belief that gender continues to play an important role as we age. And I want to share with you some of the insights on the influence of gender on ageing and ageism and elder abuse. So if you'll bear with me, we think that gender has an important role to play in our ageing. It influences, we know this from the data, that it influences the rates of disability, the burden of disease, the causes of death, life expectancy, health status, feelings of safety at home, access to transport, workforce participation rates, caring responsibilities, the use of health and aged care services, retirement income, likelihood of poverty, the risk of homelessness, the risk of abuse, the vulnerability to sexual assault, suicidality, discrimination, and rates of violence. It's a pretty extensive list. We also know that the gendered experience of ageing also varies with hierarchies of privilege and disadvantage, and that includes race, ethnicity, class, socioeconomic status, religion, language, geographical location, disability, migration status, sex, queerness, and increasing old age, because we know that old age is just not one generation of people. There are also there's evidence of links between gender and incarceration, institutional care, isolation, and separation from families, particularly stolen generations, care leavers, forgotten Australians, and those who've experienced it. You'll know also too, if you've been following our work, that we've been talking quite a lot about the fact that gender influences ageism as well too. And in particular, we've been highlighting that the ageism that older women experience is really enmeshed with sexism and misogyny. But today we're here because we stop thinking about gender when people get older, and we stop thinking about gender in the context of elder abuse. And in this gender lens document, we are suggesting, and in fact there is evidence for, an understanding that gender influences the context of elder abuse, the types of abuse experienced, the relationship to the perpetrator, the ways abuse is interpreted, the sources of help sought, the barriers to reporting, and the barriers to accessing support services. What I've tried to get across in the last couple of minutes is that gender has a powerful influence on our life experiences and opportunities all the way across our lives, and it influences our aging, our experiences of ageism, and experiences of elder abuse too. But somehow we stop thinking about it, and we've got to turn that around because it's ageist to think of older people as genderless, and to be more effective in our responses to elder abuse and to prevent elder abuse, we really must take gender into account. And the World Health Organization, in their Decade of Healthy Aging, is calling for gendered analysis to prevent elder abuse. So that's the reason that we're here today. And we tried to find another gender lens or a gender analysis framework for elder abuse anywhere in the world, and we couldn't find one. And so this may be a world first, but that doesn't make me feel terrifically happy. It makes me feel a little bit sad. And perhaps someone will find one for us, or what might be terrific as well too, if that we find gender lenses start popping up all around the country. This resource that we're sharing with you today was developed as part of our Embolden festival towards the end of last year, part of our suite on the unsilencing of older women. And we could not have done that work without our partners. Debra Nicholl is here from Elder Rights Australia, the Department of Health and Aged Care, ADA Australia, the Older Women's Network, New South Wales. We are very grateful to them for their support. But what we would like to do next, I would like to hand over to Anna Gillbard. Some of you may know of Anna's work. She's an absolute, I was going to say gun at stats. That might not be a good term to use, but she's an absolute whiz at stats. And Anna's going to show you what has happened in her service when they have looked at gender and elder abuse. Thanks, Anna.
I thought I would start by talking about our sample. But firstly, I'd like to talk about the language I'll use. I do use the word victim rather than victim survivor, as not all victims in our sample did survive the abuse, and I mean no disrespect with this. I'd also like to note that we collect data on gender rather than biological sex. I acknowledge that gender is not limited to a binary construct and it can be fluid. If a victim identifies as female, we would record them as female in the database. The final sample for this study consisted of 12,307 cases of elder abuse that were reported to the Elder Abuse Helpline in Queensland over a 6-year period. The cases consisted of abuse relationships where the perpetrators were family members or informal carers. There were 8,423 female victims and 3,884 male victims. I did exclude 17 cases. One case involved a victim who identified as non-binary. This case was excluded because a larger sample would be required for statistical analysis. There were also 16 cases excluded because the victim's gender was not recorded. With regards to victim gender, more than 2/3 of the victims were female. Some people believe that this overrepresentation is due to female longevity, but our data does not support this hypothesis. When we look at age by gender, it's a comparison between our data and population data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it showed that females were overrepresented as victims across all age groups. If the overrepresentation was simply due to females living longer, the proportions of male and female victims would be similar to their population proportions. Or for this chart, the bars for male and female victims in each age group would match up with the lines that represent the populations of males and females in the population. As you can see, that's not what this chart shows. What we see is females overrepresented as victims across all age groups, and the greatest disparity is in the younger age groups. This tells us that the reason for overrepresentation isn't as simple as female longevity. Looking at victim demographics, female victims experienced greater financial disadvantage than male victims. They were more likely to be receiving Centrelink payments, less likely to be receiving income from investments or superannuation, and less likely to own a home. A third of female victims were widowed and a third were in couple relationships. Male victims were more likely than female victims to be receiving an income from investments and superannuation and more likely to own a home. Significantly more male victims had impaired capacity, and more than half of male victims were in couple relationships. The most common age group for both male and female victims was 80 to 84 years. Moving on to perpetrator demographics. Where victims were female, the average perpetrator was aged 50 to 54 years, and the perpetrators were significantly more likely to be male, experiencing mental illness or misusing substances. Where victims were male, the average perpetrator age was 50 to 54 years, and the perpetrators were significantly more likely to be female. With regards to relationships, 76.7% of female victims were experiencing abuse from their adult children. For males, this was 64%. When it came to adult children, female victims were significantly more likely to be living with the perpetrators than male victims. Another notable difference related to the proportion of victims who were experiencing abuse from intimate partners. For female victims, it was 9% of all reported cases. For male victims, it was 19.4%. This was an unexpected finding. I also looked at precipitating factors. So these are factors which precede the abuse but seem to have contributed to the development of the abuse. An example is victim ill health. An older person may become unwell and end up in hospital. They give their bank card to one of their children so that they can pay the bills. Their child then uses the card to withdraw cash for their own use. In this scenario, the victim's ill health didn't cause the abuse, but it led to a series of events that resulted in the adult child having the opportunity to financially abuse the older person. Not every case has precipitating factors. In some cases, the abuse may go on for a very long time and may not have a clear event that preceded it. For both male and female victims, victim ill health and cohabitation were identified as the most common precipitating factors. However, there were differences. For female victims, ill health and cohabitation were almost equally identified. And commencing cohabitation with perpetrators was significantly more likely to be a precipitating factor for female victims. For male victims, victim ill health was significantly more likely to be identified as a precipitating factor. With regards to the types of abuse experienced, overall, psychological, financial, and social abuse were the most frequently reported abuse types for both male and female victims. However, when looking at the proportions, female victims were significantly more likely than males to experience psychological and sexual abuse, and male victims were significantly more likely to experience financial abuse and neglect. Overall, there were some key themes that I identified. For female victims, the first key theme was their role as a mother and the influence that this had on their situation. In 3/4 of cases where the victims were female, the perpetrators were their adult children. And more than half of the children who were perpetrators were living with the female victims. Many perpetrators who lived with victims had issues such as mental illness or issues with substance abuse. And these findings make a lot of sense when you consider the historical context. Older women were consistently told that their role was to stay at home and look after the children, and in many cases they were even banned from working. In our data, when faced with abusive behaviour from an adult child, female victims were more likely to blame themselves for their child's behaviour and more fearful of losing the relationship with the perpetrator if they reported or took action to stop the abuse. Victims who are experiencing abuse from adult children often call the helpline because they're at breaking point and they want their children to receive support. particularly when there's concerns around mental illness or substance misuse. Their role as mother, carer, and protector continues long after the children become adults. Another key theme for female victims was financial inequality. Female victims were more likely to be receiving payments from Centrelink and less likely to have additional income and less likely to own a home. It's not surprising given that older women were expected to stop work once they were married. Women who did work often had breaks from work to care for children. As a consequence, most older women have little to no superannuation. Females were also more likely to be widowed. This can increase financial disadvantage as there may be only one income to cover the cost of their rent or mortgage, along with utilities and other expenses. This financial inequality can leave the older woman more dependent on perpetrators and less able to take action to stop the abuse. And consistent with this, females victims were more fearful of becoming homeless if they took action. For male victims, the key issues appear to be related to ageing and health issues. Male victims were more likely to have impaired capacity, and victim ill health was more likely to be identified as a precipitating factor. Although the average age group for both male and female victims was the same, males often experience more chronic health conditions and die at an earlier age than females. A male born 80 years ago had a life expectancy of 72 years. Male victims were also more likely to be reported to be experiencing abuse at the hands of spouses, partners than female victims, and the abuse had been occurring for a shorter period of time. In summary, gender differences extend beyond the overrepresentation of females as victims. These findings suggest that the risk factors and contexts in which elder abuse occur differ between males and females. To prevent elder abuse and respond effectively, we need to recognise these differences. Thank you. I'll hand you back over to Catherine.
Thanks, Anna. Your work always leaves me thinking how lucky UnitingCare Queensland are to have you working with them and to have those incredible insights into what's happening for the older people who are accessing your services. And listening to you, I can see the opportunities to shape services to better respond to the needs of the older people who are accessing your services, but a need to understand this data to then prevent elder abuse from happening. And I think the other thing that I want to say about your presentation, Anne, and we talked about this before too, is that we're not suggesting that this is what happens in every pocket across the country, that there'll be differences by states and territories and where people are. But what we wanted to do with your presentation was to highlight that gender does make a difference, and it can teach us so much about how to shape services and how to prevent elder abuse. And so it's not okay to continue to think of older people as genderless or to think of elder abuse responses as gender neutral. That's not okay. What I'd like to do now is share with you just a little of a look inside the gender lens and share with you why we did what we did. And the first part of that is talking about the guidance that we drew on. And this from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in the Australia-wide approach to including gender. And in this statement, the Prime Minister's office talk about the sort of the misconception that policies can be gender neutral or are gender blind. The misconception that gender doesn't matter. Gender does matter. And the statement here is that, if we take what we think is a gender neutral approach is actually a gender blind approach, it means that the work that we can do can have disproportionate disadvantages on people because of their gender. So we've got to take gender into account. We also took guidance from the World Health Organization, and in their recent document on tackling the abuse of older people, they are calling for a gender-specific approach and understanding that gender and power influence the way we live our lives, the way we age, and the way elder abuse is experienced. And so the World Health Organization is saying this is clearly what we need to do, but it doesn't seem that anybody yet has taken that pragmatic approach to developing a gender lens to help organisations and services really explore the role of gender in preventing elder abuse. We also recognise that the national plan to respond to the abuse and mistreatment of older people, this second plan, includes a recognition that gender does make a difference, and we think that's a really positive step forward. We are a little bit concerned, and you'll see here on the right, this is our submission to the Attorney General's Department, and we thought that recognition of gender is important, but in the principles, the focus areas and priorities coming out of that document, gender does not appear. And we think that in our ageist world, even in services, we've got to have that explicit guidance for services. Services need to understand the kind of data that Anna's talking about, and it needs to be really explicit for it to make a difference. But in the development of the actual gender lens tool, we drew particularly on the European, I forgot the name of them, my apologies, the European Institute for Gender Equality, which basically have a gender analysis template, and we have adapted that for the purposes of this document. So just to share with you the aims and objectives, just really briefly, what we are trying to do with this gender lens document, the GLE we're calling it, the gender lens for elder abuse prevention, is we want to really promote more effective responses to elder abuse and prevention of elder abuse. And basically, we're using a quality improvement cycle to try and do that. And we want people to understand historical and contemporary inequalities, identifying the gendered experiences of elder abuse, patterns of service use, and then to implement gender-specific strategies to prevent elder abuse and to promote gender equality in the context of elder abuse. So that's what we're trying to do. And we have 7 elements to the gender lens. And basically, these 7 elements are mimicking that quality improvement cycle that so many of us know, which is really can do, plan, act, or action and reflection, action and reflection. It's really quite simplistic in many ways, but the 7 elements begin by acknowledging historical gender inequalities. And that is particularly an understanding that those inequalities weren't in the past, they're not done. They have a contemporary legacy, and that's the second element. And there are other inequalities as well. We have outlined a specific element for including marginalised groups because we think that it's critical to understand the layers and layers and layers of difference, and particularly marginalisation and disadvantage. We're calling for services to gather data on gender and elder abuse, to identify patterns in service use, and then also to talk to older people about service gaps. And then basically to complete that quality cycle, develop a plan to address those gaps and then evaluate it and try and strengthen those outcomes, and to share. We think that sharing outcomes or sharing data, as Anna has, is really important, particularly at this part of change around a gender lens, because there's not a visibility around gender and elder abuse. And so we're asking that elder abuse services share their gender analysis, share their strategies for gender equality is a really important step in creating that momentum for change. The GLE, the gender lens tool, also includes for each one of the elements, includes, as you'll see in the document on the left, it includes a context statement, a principle, some key questions, some considerations, and some suggested actions. The document's very evidence-based, so hundreds of articles have been referenced in the development of this to try and create an evidence base, and then really pragmatic, practical guidelines for you to implement this in your workplace. And what we have included with there are two parts to this document. The first one is the elements, principles, and guidelines, which is a PDF document. But we've also included a gender analysis and planning tool, and that is so that organisations can download it and adapt it. There may be some principles we don't know yet. We don't know enough about this. Nobody's doing it globally. So download it, adapt it, and then we'll refine it and hopefully come to you in the future with a second version of it. You'll notice all this information is up on the Embolden Festival 2024 webpage because it was developed from that event. And because it was developed from that event on the unsciencing of older women, the gender lens that we have developed in particular focuses on older women, but this can be adapted and should be adapted to for gender analysis relating to older men and for trans and gender diverse people as well. So that's it in a nutshell. It's up there on the website already, and we are very grateful to the Embolden partners who provided us with the support to help make this happen. And one of them was you, Debra, Nicholl, CEO of Elder Rights Australia. And you're going to help us by reflecting on what you think this means for elder abuse services.
Thank you to partner with you on such important work. I would firstly just like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today from the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I would like to pay my respects to all elders, past and present. So most of us know something about the history of gender equality or inequality in Australia, but not the lived experience of it for older women, nor indeed the contemporary legacies. As Catherine has already mentioned, gender is a constant throughout our lives. So becoming genderless or being considered so when we turn 65 is an ageist myth. Aging, ageism, abuse of the older person are gendered experiences, as Anna has so well pointed out. Service providers need to ensure that they consider gender when they are care planning or responding to elder abuse. That they're well prepared and able to recognise and draw connections that better prepare and enable the direct support staff to truly deliver that person-centred care or person-centred individual response. Care that is safe, trauma-informed, flexible and individualised. The legacies of inequality are very much experienced by older women, and trauma responses can be triggered if communication is not respectful, if choice and decision-making is denied, and of course, for those women who've suffered violence or sexual abuse, the delivery of personal care is very confronting. This can be enormously distressing for the older woman, but also for frontline staff who do not have the tools or understanding to respond appropriately. Unfortunately, at Elder Rights Australia, we hear of issues every day that relate to the delivery of inappropriate care, both in residential aged care homes, in the community, in healthcare settings. We also hear of abuse of older person issues. More often than we do, like mostly, these issues involve older women than older men. This is why Elder Rights Australia supported the development of a gender lens for elder abuse. Older persons, their families, carers and friends often seek advocacy support to raise concerns about care that is not being delivered in a consideration of the person's history or life experiences. But we also hear from aged care staff who feel that they just do not have the resources or the information and support that they need to provide a quality service or to feel satisfied that they're making a positive difference in the lives of the older people for whom they provide services and care. I would strongly encourage all service providers to embrace and circulate the unsilencing of older women, a gender lens for elder abuse, particularly to raise awareness and support staff in the delivery of care that is safe, trauma-informed, flexible and individualised. The New Age Care Act, which comes into play on the 1st of July, focuses on the human rights of the older person and the delivery of person-centred care. So for us to truly be able to meet the expectation of an improved rights-based aged care system, we will need to view care planning and delivery through a gender lens. The implications of this document are enormous. It will be an invaluable resource for elder abuse response and support services like Elder Rights Australia and, of course, the other OPAN network members across Australia. And we are in every state. It's also critical, not just for advocates and elder abuse response workers, but also for healthcare workers, social workers and lawyers alike. So I'd like to give a really heartfelt thank you to Catherine and the team at Celebrate Ageing and congratulate you all on another action-based initiative that has the potential to make a huge impact in the lives of older women. So thank you.
Thank you, Debra, and thank you for your support for this important project. It feels like a really powerful resource and legacy from the work we did on Embolden and the unsilencing of older women. So thank you for that. And now we would like to invite Age Discrimination Commissioner Robert Fitzgerald to respond to the gender lens. Thank you, Robert.
Catherine, joy to be able to reflect on what is just a terrific project, thoughtful, evidence-based, and ultimately very impactful. And so for me, it's a great joy to be here. And thanks for allowing an older white male from a very privileged background to be able to participate in this discussion. And I also just want to acknowledge the lands of the Gadigal people from which I'm talking to you today. If anything gave me an insight into the fact of men and women were different in the way they approach the issue of elder abuse was a forum that I attended in my former role a couple of years ago. I was the Age and Disability Commissioner in New South Wales, which was a new statutory agency to deal with the prevention and abuse and respond to abuse of both older people and adults with disability. It was a forum. It was a group largely around a particular faith from a particular ethnic community. In the front couple of rows were the men and in the back rows were the women. And during the speech, as I was talking about elder abuse and how we prevent it, including within their own communities, the men sat with their arms crossed and the women all nodded. And that visual representation sticks with me today. And so the expression that Catherine, I think, used was general gender neutrality actually ends up being gender blind. And that can't be the right approach in relation to either the prevention or response to abuse of older people. And so I think this report really does us an extraordinary favour for those of us involved in this very important issue, because as I think Anna and Debra have quite demonstrated, is that the experience of different people from different genders, whatever that may be, are in fact different. And they shape us as individuals and they shape us in the way in which we access services. And we should be shaping the way in which service providers respond to us. In many senses, that seems unexceptional. And yet our service systems generally don't do that, don't take into account the different needs, expectations, aspirations of different genders. A couple of thoughts I just want to make in relation to it. The way in which you enter old age will very much determine the way in which you experience old age, including the risks of abuse. And so this work is critically important in taking us back an important step. How do women in particular experience the life of the world around them as they are journeying towards old age? we know absolutely that women's rights in the criminal justice system were very much disadvantaged. The evidence of women was, in fact, always devalued vis-a-vis the evidence of a male. And that's only recently changed in my own legal lifetime. We've seen the role of women being shaped both in society and in the economy, and a whole range of issues that we've talked about in the reports identify how those changes have often disadvantaged women or particularly shaped the way in which they'll enter older age. The cultural diversity that we see in Australia also shows, however, that in some communities, patrimony is extremely high, and the role of women is very much subservient in those particular cultural groups, both before and entry into older age. And we know that religions and communities have not really acknowledged the role of women to the full extent that they should. And all of these shape how women enter 65 years of age. It also shapes, of course, people of all genders. And so the notion at the moment that the media has and many public policy is that we enter old age healthier, we will live longer, wealthier, and we will be more computer literate is true for many. That is absolutely not true for all. And the group that is particularly disadvantaged in entering old age at the moment are older women, for the reasons we've talked about. You've identified in the report some really concrete reasons as to why people enter older age were disadvantaged relative to others. And that can go to the way in which our divorce regimes worked in the past and the disadvantage in relation to property settlements. It can be about the family and domestic violence that have an enormous impact, particularly on women, but many people. It's about the wages and superannuation differentials that we've talked about many, many times. So people come into older age economically less well off. And the housing stress is an enormous indicator of future risk. One of the main indicators of increased abuse of older people, which also took place during COVID and after that, is housing stress within the family unit more generally, not only in relation to the individual, but also the family members. And when we reach older age, then of course the risk factors for both women and men, but particularly for women that's been identified by Anna, are very clear. It is extraordinary that the notion that where there's simply more older people in older age, and therefore that's the reason for abuse, has been discounted by Anna today. And I think that's an extraordinarily important finding. It's also extraordinarily important to understand the risk drivers for different types of abuse. And one of the phenomenons which you're aware of, and Anna put that up today, was that in relation to financial abuse, your daughter is as likely as your son to actually abuse you, whether you're a male or a female. So that analysis is really important to understand not only the nature of the abuse we see, but the drivers and ultimately the risk factors that apply. But for women in older age, I think there are particular risks that are emerging if we look at it. We see the role of women in many cultural communities being identified as the person that will look after their older relatives. And often women in that role are identified as the principal carer, but they're incapable of actually caring. Everyone in the family says to the woman, "Oh, we help you care for them." All they do is tell them how bad they're doing and what they should be doing better. It's hardly supportive. And that, of course, is actually really important in many of the cultural communities where we see a heightened level of abuse, not necessarily intentionally, but because of the role of women in that society and their role as carers has been defined. We're seeing really great stress on women in relation to their children and grandchildren, asking them to go guarantor for a whole range of very risky ventures and credit arrangements. And it seems to me to be a particular issue in relation to women being asked to provide that. We've got very substantial humbugging within the Aboriginal communities, and often the victim of that is in fact the grandmother or the female elder. We see the abuse of powers of attorneys, and perhaps here we need more analysis to see whether or not there is a gender approach. But it wouldn't surprise me again if we saw the level of abuse in that was probably more where the female is the principal. And so there are really clear, very demonstrable areas where I think women are disadvantaged in older age for a whole range of reasons. What this paper really does is to not only highlight that, but says in the response to these particular issues, we've got to do a great deal better. And I do think this is going to be the great challenge. Governments, by and large, are gender blind in relation to a range of areas. And so trying to encourage governments, the agencies they fund and the services that are out there to actually take a gender approach will be antithetical to the way in which they think about these issues. In just about all the legislation that deals with these sorts of issues, and including the new Aged Care Act and the NDIS Act, there is a call out about a whole range of groups that either should be given particular attention to or prioritisation. And it won't surprise you that women are included in that list. But that actually hardly gets us anywhere. It hardly gets us to redesigning service systems that are responding to abuse. It simply highlights that there are special issues. What this paper does is highlight what those issues are, and also gives a guidance through the toolkit and the other particular aspects of the documents, to the planning documents, to how we might actually shape that service system response with a gender focus or a gender lens, as you say. And I think that really matters a great deal. The last comments I want to make, however, is a strength-based approach. There's no doubt at all that women have an advantage over men in relation to their ability to live out old age. And one of those is in relation to their ability to maintain relationships. Now, it is true that some of those relationships with your children are unsafe. And as research shows that the vast majority of abuse of older people are by people you should be able to trust, either your intimate partner or your children. Tragically, that's not the case. But nevertheless, women are capable of forming relationships in a way that older men seem less capable of doing. Women are able to sustain a community or a network around them in a way that many men are also incapable of doing. But there have been improvements in relation to that. There is certainly the view that women are willing to accept and seek out advice more readily than men. And I think that's probably something that goes throughout life. Men know it all. They don't need to use manuals. They're able to put IKEA furniture together without looking at the instructions until it falls apart. But actually that translates into older age. They don't seek advice and they don't seek support in the way that perhaps women do. And the last point, but it's, I suppose, a combination of all of those, is connectedness. So one of the important factors that reduces the risk of elder abuse for all people is being connected into social networks and support groups and all sorts of other activities. So I think that there are some strengths that go with being female. And I think that is changing. But that means that we want to build those strengths, build on those capacities, as well as hopefully in relation to other genders, particularly men, they might be able to build some of those capacities. So finally, just going back to the notion of ageism. Ageism sits at the heart of all this, and the crossover between ageism and the inability to actually acknowledge the various backgrounds, experiences, needs and aspirations of different genders, I think is a really important learning from this particular work. I talk about ageism all the time. It's almost my job. Ageism is the way we think, we feel, and we act towards people simply based on age. But what your work has done for me and what your work will do for others is to say, well, that's okay. But are there various aspects in that ageism area that are gender specific? And you've done me a great favour. And I think you will do policymakers and service providers a great favour by the work you've done. So again, I go back to say thanks for the work Catherine and all of the contributors have done. I think it is a very thoughtful, evidence-based, impactful piece of work. And I think if it's first in the world, well done, Catherine and team. But even if it isn't, in Australia, it will really force us all to think differently, including myself. And for that, I'm very, very grateful.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you so much for your kind and thoughtful words. I love that idea. I'm going to go back and listen to this again, that your reflection that this is a thoughtful, evidence-based, and I think you said ultimately very helpful resource. That's what we were aiming for. But you're right, the challenge, developing the resource is just the start. And the challenge ahead for us is to get take-up. And we've certainly sent that In our submission to the Attorney General's office, we said it's coming, and today we sent it to them. We've sent it to the Older Persons Advocacy Network. We've sent it to the Australian Institute of Family Studies and Compass as well too. But what we've got to really do now is look to see how this document can help to create change. And I think that perhaps one of the most powerful ways of doing that will not be waiting for it to be government policy, but having elder abuse services watching this presentation, seeing what Anna has done and going, actually, a gender analysis might be really helpful for us. It might really help us to do the work we're going to do. And I think if elder abuse services are doing that gender analysis and finding it helpful, then we will be driving change from service providers right up through policy. I think that is one of the ways forward, but not the only way. And we will be looking for many ways forward. I think the other thing that I would like to say as well too is, we very definitely focused on older women with this resource because it came from our Embolden event on the unsilencing of older women. I think it does apply as well too to older men. I would like to see a gender analysis related to older men and just to see what it is that we have to learn. And then I think of all the older trans and gender diverse people that I know who are really doing it tough now as they're having that wave of transphobia that's coming across from the US, and that is affecting their families. It is affecting how their families see them, maybe families feeling shame, and the transphobic pressure within families is escalating, and we really must look at a gender lens for trans and gender diverse people as well. So to anybody who is listening today and watching this recording is please share this resource. Share it with your local MP, share it with your local elder abuse service, pick it up and use it in your service, but please help us make this document make a difference. Any little thing you do can help make a difference, and I thank you all for being here.